You are now listening to the story, Sold for a Plate of Food at 9. She came back at 19 with a list of names, a tale of betrayal, survival, and justice where a little girl was traded like cattle, but returned a decade later, not as a victim, but as a reckoning. 10 years had passed, but the town of Copper Ridge hadn't changed. The crooked saloon sign still creaked in the wind. The general store's paint peeled like old scars. In the sheriff's office, once a symbol of law, stood like a mausoleum of forgotten justice. The only thing different was her dot. Magnolia Voss, once a frightened little girl, had come back. A woman with purpose in her step and something folded in her coat pocket. A list of names, each one a thread in the tapestry of her stolen childhood. She walked down the dusty street like a ghost made of iron. Every step echoed, every gaze turned in her direction. Whispers buzzed through the town like flies over something rotten. Magnolia didn't stop until she reached the place she knew too well. Fletcher's General Store. The man inside, Tobias Crow, was stacking cans behind the counter with hands that once counted coins for her soul. Her father. She stepped inside, and the bell above the door rang. His face turned toward her and drained of color. One can rolled off the counter and clattered to the floor. She didn't greet him, didn't smile. Instead, she pulled out the folded yellow, paper-creased, aged, but still legible, placed it on the counter. 7 names, written in careful script. Tobias Crow was number 4. Maggie. His voice cracked like old leather. Sweet Lord, is that really you? She studied him, his sun-worn face, the gray in his beard, the flicker of shame behind his eyes. Gone was the man who once braided her hair. All that remained was a stranger who had once chosen survival over his daughter. You remember me? She asked coldly. Good. That'll make this easier. He stumbled backward, bumping into a shelf. Maggie, please. Times were hard. Your mama was dying, and we had other mouths to feed. I didn't want to sell. We had no choice. Her eyes narrowed. You took 20 silver pieces from Cora Lane for me. He wilted. I counted them twice. He admitted, the words coming out like a confession. She slipped the paper back into her coat. I've spent 10 years learning how to find people like you. Before Tobias could respond, the bell chimed again. The door opened, and heavy boots stepped inside. Sheriff Silas Ward. He hadn't aged well. Silver on his badge had tarnished, and his guts strained against his vest. But his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, were still sharp as razors. Well, he drawled. Didn't know you were expecting company, Tobias? Maggie didn't turn, but she recognized the voice instantly. Silas Ward, named number 1 on her list. She did turn then, slowly, calmly. Her hand hovered near the Colt revolver under her coat. Still wearing that star, she said. Still protecting this town, he replied with a smug grin. And you're disturbing the peace just by breathing. Tobias tried to interject. Now, Silas, maybe we can shut your mouth, Ward snapped. I'm talking to her. His hand drifted to his belt. His fingers rested on his gun. You know, he said, there have been whispers about a woman raising hell in Deadwood. 3 men found face down in the dirt. One of them had a scarf, like the one you got from biting my belt 10 years back. Maggie felt the old wound throb on her cheek. It had never fully healed. Lots of people have scars, Sheriff, she said, her voice like frost. Not like that. He stepped closer, and the stench of whiskey clung to him. I'll ask you one time. Are you here to cause trouble? She didn't blink. Just here to visit family. Pay respects. Ward didn't believe her, but he didn't press either. Well, pay those respects fast, okay? This town's got enough ghosts. As he turned to leave, he paused. Okay? And that list you carry? Be careful who you show it to, okay? Some of those names don't appreciate attention. Door slammed behind him. Tobias let out a shaky breath. He knows. Maggie nodded. That changes things. She had planned to take her time, to let them feel her presence, let the weight of guilt crush them before she struck. Now, she couldn't afford that luxury. Who else knows I'm here? Tobias hesitated. In a town like this, probably everyone. Outside's faces peeked from windows, curtains twitched. Copper Ridge was holding its breath, but Maggie hadn't come alone. Just beyond town, in the stables, Daniel Cross waited. A man with a saddlebag full of evidence. A former investigator who had spent 3 years gathering testimonies from children who'd been sold during the Hunger Years. Together, had everything they needed to burn Copper Ridge down legally. But first, Maggie had to flush the rats into the open. I want you to spread the word, she told Tobias. Tell them I'm staying at the old Murphy house. That place is falling apart, he protested. Perfect, quiet, isolated, and it has a back door. She turned to leave, then paused. When they come from the end, they will make sure you're far away. Her voice dropped. A way of staining everything. Okay. She left him standing there, shaking, at the edge of town. The Murphy place loomed like a skeleton. Its broken windows stared down the hill like hollow eyes. Maggie stepped inside, dust swirling around her boots. She found a chair, sat by the front door, and waited. And as the sun dipped below the ridge, she lit a candle in the window, a signal it had begun. Night descended like a slow curse over Copper Ridge. The sky turned to ink, pierced only by a few stars and the dim flicker of Maggie's candle in the window of the Murphy house. That flicker wasn't for warmth or light. It was a signal, warning, and a dare dot. The Murphy place sat on a hill, abandoned for years. No one dared go near it, not because of ghosts, but because of memories of the Hunger Years, of desperate choices and darker deals. It was the perfect place for Maggie to stage her reckoning. She sat by the front window, her coat resting in her lap, her eyes fixed on the path leading up the hill. Below, the town was unnaturally quiet, but she knew Copper Ridge too well. They were watching, waiting. She didn't have to wait long. The first figure appeared just after sundown, a thin man, limping, holding a lantern in one hand and what looked like a shotgun in the other. Ezekiel Marsh, the town banker. Name number 5. She watched him through a cracked pane of glass as he circled the house like a nervous wolf. I know you're in there, girl, he called out. We need to talk. Maggie said nothing. Fear made men predictable, and Ezekiel was unraveling before her eyes. 20 minutes later, 2 more silhouettes joined the night. One was Cora Lane. Her pale hair was pinned tight, her posture stiff. She hadn't aged much, still cloaked in the same sour arrogance she wore the day she paid for a child, like she might pay for a mule. With her came a man Maggie didn't recognize, tall, mean-looking, a hired gun, no doubt. They positioned themselves on either side of the house, trying to box her in. Amateurs. But then came the real threat. Movement near the back of the house. Sheriff Silas Ward, crouching low, moving through the tall grass, his gun drawn, thinking he was clever, thinking he had the upper hand. 4 of them, 4 names from her list, all converging on the Murphy house. They thought they were laying a trap, but the trap wasn't for her. Out the back window, Maggie could see a flicker in the canyon. A second. Candle. Daniel Cross had seen her signal. He was ready. He wasn't alone. In the brush behind him were 2 federal marshals, good men with orders to move only if the situation turned bloody. Daniel had warned her, if it gets loud, it gets fast. Be sure you're ready. She was, but then everything changed. A child's voice cried out from the darkness. Daddy owes me more than he'll ever pay. Came Cora Lane's voice, dripping honey over venom. But tonight, I'll settle for her. They had a hostage, a little girl, okay? No older than Maggie had been when they sold her. Her name was Emma, and she was being used as leverage. You want her back alive, Cora called. Then walk out that door with your hands up. Maggie's blood turned to ice. They were still doing it 10 years later. And they were still trading children like poker chips. She stood slowly and walked toward the door, but didn't open it. What do you want? She called back. Sheriff Ward answered, his voice tight. It's the list. And any copies you made, hand it over, and the girl goes free. Maggie hesitated. She had options. Daniel was watching. The marshals were near. But if bullets started flying, Emma wouldn't survive the crossfire. She had to buy time. All right, she said. I'm coming out. She placed her hand on the latch, then stopped. But before I do, she said loudly, I have something to say. Make it quick, Ward barked. She raised her voice, letting it carry down the hill, into the town below. 10 years ago, this town sold me like cattle. I was 9 years old. My people made that deal and they're all outside this house. Right now, ready to do it again. Ward cursed. Shut up. But it was too late. Lanterns lit up across Copper Ridge like fireflies. People poured from their homes, drawn by the sound of Maggie's voice and the truth behind it. A crowd formed at the base of the hill. Farmers, mothers, storekeepers, people who'd lived in silence, who'd heard rumors, but never proof. Now, the proof had a name. Her name was Magnolia Voss, up the hill. The people surrounding the house began to panic. This is your fault, Ward. Someone shouted from the crowd. You were supposed to protect us. Ward spun around, his authority crumbling. His gun twitched between Maggie and the crowd. He was sweating now, desperate. Maggie saw it, his masks cracking. One push, she thought. Just one last chance, Cora. She called out, let the girl go and I'll walk out peaceful. Keep her, and you explain to this town why you're pointing guns at a child. Silence. Then Cora made her move. Emma, honey, she said, her voice like syrup. Go on now, walk. To Mama Maggie. Emma hesitated, then ran toward the house. Maggie opened the door and caught her in her arms, lifting her up with one hand and drawing her revolver with the other. Get inside, she whispered. The crowd was still advancing. Ward was surrounded, and just when it looked like chaos might erupt, a new voice cut through the night. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Daniel Cross stepped forward from the shadows, a leather satchel in one hand, a sawed-off shotgun in the other. Behind him, 3 marshals, badges gleaming. I'm Daniel Cross, he announced, a special investigator for the territorial governor. I have arrest warrants for 7 individuals in charges of human trafficking, conspiracy, and corruption. Test. Town went still. Ward's face twisted in disbelief. This is a setup. He was right. It was. But Maggie had planned for that too. For a long moment, no one moved. The lanterns in the crowd swayed in the evening breeze. Faces, once full of suspicion, were now wide-eyed, staring up the hill at the scene unraveling before them. A little girl cradled in Maggie's arms, a federal investigator, flanked by armed marshals, and a sheriff frozen in his own lies. This is a trick. Sheriff Ward barked again, but his voice cracked. She's a criminal, troublemaker, stirring up ghosts. Daniel Cross didn't flinch. This, he said, raising the leather satchel, is 3 years of work. It's 12 testimonies from survivors like Magnolia. It's financial records, tracing, cash exchanges during the famine years, and 6 crime scenes with physical evidence that links right back to Copper Ridge. He opened the satchel and pulled out a stack of papers, handing them to one of the marshals. Your name's on 3 separate ledgers. Sheriff, Kikora, Lane 4, children, bought in 5 months. Ezekiel Marsh, every transaction went through. Your bank. Marsh paled. I was just a banker, he stammered. I didn't know what the money was really for. You knew, Maggie said, her voice cold. And you counted every coin just like my father did. Ezekiel looked like. He might be sick. The townspeople behind Daniel had moved closer now, no longer just watching. Many of them had their own stories, children who'd vanished, neighbors who'd grown distant after the hunger years, families who'd never truly recovered. What about the children who disappeared? A woman in the crowd shouted. Son vanished 8 years ago. We thought it was illness. But if it wasn't? Cora Lane stepped forward, her mask of elegance cracking. This isn't a time to dredge up old pain. We did what we had to do to survive. No, Maggie said. You did what you could get away with. There's a difference. Sheriff Ward's eyes flicked to the crowd, then back to the house. He was surrounded, but a desperate man with a plea. Badge and a gun is still dangerous, and Maggie knew it. He lunged for her. A shot rang out, but it wasn't his. One of the marshals fired, knocking the gun from Ward's hand before he could even draw it fully. He stumbled back, shocked, blood dripping from his fingers. Enough, Daniel growled. You're done. The other marshals moved in quickly, producing iron shackles from their saddlebags. Cora, Ezekiel, the hired muscle, none of them resisted. Ward, though, spat curses as they cuffed him, struggling against the inevitable. You think this changes anything? He roared. You think taking down 7 names means you've won? There are dozens more out there, hundreds. Maggie didn't argue. She just looked him in the eye. Maybe I can't stop them all, she said, but I can stop you. And that was enough. The town stood in stunned silence as the once mighty Sheriff Silas Ward, who had ruled Copper Ridge with a heavy hand and a crooked smile, was led away in chains. It was over, but only on the surface, because after the guns had quieted and the law had spoken, the harder part began. The part where pain turned to reflection, where Maggie had to face the man who had sold her. Tobias Crow had stayed hidden during the standoff, but now he stood at the edge of the road as she approached. His eyes were red. His hands trembled at his sides. You did it, he whispered. She didn't answer. Didn't think you would come back, he added. Let alone all this. I came for justice, she replied. Not revenge. He lowered his head. I don't deserve either. She looked at him not with hate, but with something else. Something more complex. I spent 10 years trying to imagine what I'd say to you, she said. I thought I'd scream, spit, turn away, but I realized something tonight. He met her gaze, hesitant. You weren't just a villain, she said. You were a man crushed by desperation. You made the worst choice a father could make, and lived with it every day since. He nodded slowly, tears welling. Your mother died 3 days after you were taken. I told myself it was worth it so the boys could live, but it wasn't. What happened to them? Eli made it too. Oregon. Started a farm. Seth died of fever. And the youngest Jameses somewhere in Kansas. Last I heard. She was quiet, a long moment. Then she reached into her coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. It jingled softly with coins. What's this? He asked. My share of the reward money Daniel mentioned for helping bring down the ring. She set it on the counter beside him. For the boys, she said, and maybe for yourself. His hands hovered over the pouch, unsure whether he had the right to touch it. I don't deserve your forgiveness, he said hoarsely. Maybe not, Maggie whispered, but I deserve to give it. Then she turned and walked away. The sun was just beginning to rise as she reached the canyon where Daniel waited beside 2 fresh horses. Ready? He asked. She looked back once at the town that had broken her, then tried to bury her. A town that now had a second chance. Yes, she said. Let's ride. The road out of Copper Ridge curved through the low hills like a scar winding, rough, but leading toward something better. Magnolia, Voss, and Daniel crossed roads side by side, their horses kicking up dust in the early dawn light. For the first time in 10 years. Maggie felt something close to peace. The list was no longer just names on a page. It had become history documented, proven, and prosecuted. The marshals had loaded the prisoners into wagons before sunrise. By now, they'd be halfway to the territorial capital, where public trials would follow. But justice wasn't just about arrests. It was about healing what had been broken. And Maggie knew that process was only beginning. I didn't think it would end like that, she said quietly, the reins slack in her hands. Daniel glanced over. What did you expect? She thought for a moment. I expected to feel triumphant, to be full of fire and fury, but I just feel tired. That's the truth of justice, he replied. It's not a clean burn. It leaves ashes. They rode in silence for a while. The sun began to rise behind them, casting long shadows on the trail. After some time, they stopped to water the horses at a creek. Daniel crouched by the bank, filling canteens. Maggie sat on a flat rock, watching the ripples dance across the surface. I keep thinking about Emma, she said, breaking the quiet. How close she came to becoming another me. She won't, Daniel assured. Not after what you did. She's just one girl, Maggie said. How many more are still trapped in places like Copper Ridge with no one watching? Daniel pulled a folded map from his satchel. That's why we don't stop, he said. You lit the fire. Now we carry it forward. He pointed to a small town circled in red in Gray Falls. Similar rumors there. Disappearances, corrupt officials. We've got a contact school teacher. It's been collecting names quietly, waiting for help. Maggie traced the path on the map with her finger. You really think we can do it again? I think we have to. She nodded slowly, her expression hardening with renewed resolve. I'm in. Okay. They reached the next town 2 days later. It wasn't much different from Copper Ridge 1 Main Road. A few shops, a sheriff's station, and the church whose steeple leaned slightly to the left. Life moved slow there. It's too slow, Maggie thought, for the rumors she'd heard to be false. They kept a low profile at first. Daniel posed as a government surveyor. Maggie took a room at the boarding house under the name Clara Moore. By day, she helped in the kitchen and listened. By night, she met with Daniel and the school teacher, Miss Irene Bella, woman in her early 40s, with a spine of steel and eyes that had seen too much. I've been teaching here 15 years, Irene said during one of their late-night meetings. And in the last 5, I've lost 9 students, boys and girls, home between the ages of 7 and 12. Any explanations? Daniel asked. Always the same. Moved away with relatives. But no one ever sees them go. No goodbyes. Just gone. Maggie felt her stomach tighten. Same patterns. The same lies. She looked at Irene. You have names. Irene nodded and slid a piece of paper across the table. 5 names. 5 children, and beside each name a local official, Sheriff Harper, Mayor Benton, Dr. Wills. Maggie recognized the structure immediately. Power, influence, access, all the ingredients for corruption. What about the parents? She asked, too afraid to speak. Or too poor to refuse offers when they're desperate. Maggie didn't judge them. She'd seen it before. She lived it. The next few days were spent quietly investigating. Daniel obtained town records. Irene continued teaching and listening. Maggie, meanwhile, inserted herself into the background, helping at the bakery, chatting with the townsfolk. Watching and waiting at the boarding house, she met a boy named Nathan, 10 years old, polite, and far too thin for his age. Your parents around? Ski asked casually one evening. My mama died, he said. Sheriff Harper checks in sometimes, says I might be moving to the city soon, for schooling, away. He said it made her skin crawl. She knew that lie. She lived it, too. That night, Maggie and Daniel reconvened at the schoolhouse. It's starting again, she said. Just like before. Daniel nodded grimly. Then we do what we came here to do. They laid out a plan. Step 1, expose the connections. Step 2, gather witnesses. Step 3, trigger a public confrontation. Step 4, bring in the law. But this time, Maggie wasn't just bait. She was the trap itself. The next morning, she visited the sheriff's office in plain sight. She made small talk, asked about registering property. She smiled when needed. Sheriff Harper eyed her suspiciously. You're new in town, he said. Just passing through, she replied. Looking to settle, eventually? You got any children? Not yet, she lied. But I'd like to someday. He leaned back, studying her with that same cold gaze Maggie remembered from Sheriff Ward. She knew what he was, and now he knew she was here. Game on. That night, she and Daniel lit a single candle in the schoolhouse window. Another signal, and this time, they weren't alone. Irene had rallied to grieving mothers who had lost children. One of them had a letter written by her son before he vanished, describing a man who looked just like Dr. Swills visiting late at night. It was enough. Daniel wired the marshals. Maggie stared at the flame in the window. She could feel the rage building again, but underneath it's something steadier, purpose, clarity. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was the storm. The candle in the schoolhouse window flickered like a heartbeat, quiet, persistent, refusing to die. Maggie sat just inside, revolver on the desk, watching the street through a slit in the curtain. Daniel stood by the back door, checking his pocket watch every few minutes. They'll come tonight, he said, voice steady. They always do, Maggie replied. This time, though, she wasn't alone in a collapsing house on a hill. She had allies, she had witnesses, and, most importantly, she had a town ready to listen. The marshals would arrive at dawn, but by then, everything would be in motion. The trap had been set, the evidence gathered. The parents warned. All that remained was the confrontation. Just after midnight, heavy footsteps echoed down the street. 3 men approached the schoolhouse: Sheriff Harper, Mayor Benton, cowl-wrapped in tailored coats and false smiles. Miss Moore, Harper called out. We need to speak with you. Maggie didn't move from her place behind the desk. Daniel opened the front door just enough for the lamplight to spill out. You're not welcome here, he said. Benton stepped forward. You don't want to start trouble in our town. You're new. You don't understand how things work. I understand more than you think, Maggie said, finally rising. She stepped into the doorway, her face hard as stone. I know about the children. I know about the bribes, the relocations that were lies. And I know this town is tired of losing its sons and daughters. Harper's hand twitched toward his belt. You've made a serious accusation. No, Daniel said, pulling a folded paper from his coat. We've made an official one. Affidavits from 2 mothers. A letter from a missing child. And town ledgers that show irregular payments to your accounts. Wills paled. You're bluffing. You think so? Daniel smiled grimly. Then you won't mind answering to the marshals when they arrive. The 3 men froze. You don't understand what you're doing, Benton said, his voice a low growl. I understand perfectly, Maggie said, and so does the town. As if on cue, lanterns appeared on the edge of the street. A dozen townspeople approached, fathers holding rifles, mothers holding hands with children, teachers and farmers and clerks who had heard too many whispers for too long. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their presence said enough. We don't want blood, Daniel said. We want truth, confession, and protection for what matters. Maggie took a step forward. 'Cause if you don't, we'll burn your lies down. One document, one name at a time. Benton opened his mouth to protest, but no words came. They had lost. They just didn't know how to fall quietly by sunrise. The marshals arrived, right on time. The 3 officials were taken into custody. their protests drowned out by the voices of the people they'd failed. In the days that followed, Maggie and Daniel stayed to help organize a town meeting. Names of lost children were read aloud in the square. A makeshift memorial was built at the church steps. Irene Bell was appointed head of a new council to protect local families and report directly to territorial authorities. Great Falls would never be the same because the truth had been named. And once truth is spoken, Des doesn't go back to sleep. On their last morning in town, Maggie visited the small hill behind the schoolhouse. Emma, now under Irene's care, had drawn a picture there with colored chalk, two girls holding hands beneath the rising sun. Maggie knelt beside her. "Is that me?" she asked. Emma nodded. "You saved me," the little girl whispered. "No," Maggie replied. "You reminded me why I came back." She hugged Emma tightly, then stood and walked toward Daniel, who waited with the horses. "You ready?" he asked. "Always," she said, mounting up. Before they rode out, Irene handed Maggie a bundle of letters, notes from families across the territory who had heard what happened. Some offering help, others asking for it. Maggie tucked the bundle into her coat. A new list, not of names to punish, but of places to protect, as they disappeared into the horizon. Daniel looked over at her. "You ever think you'll stop writing?" Maggie thought about it, about the pain, the exhaustion, the weight of memory. "No," she said, "because there's always another town." Daniel nodded. "But someday," she added softly, "I hope there isn't." Over the next year, Maggie and Daniel helped bring down trafficking rings in 5 more towns. They never stayed long, never accepted reward money. Their names became whispered legends, half outlaw, half savior. And though Maggie never kept a diary, stories of her spread like wildfire. Emma Briggs grew up safe in a reformed Great Falls. She became a teacher like Irene, sharing the story of the woman who saved her. Her classroom had a sign over the door. "We remember." As for Tobias, Crow Maggie's father, he moved to Oregon using the coin pouch she gave him to build a modest school for orphans. He never remarried, spent the rest of his days trying to give others what he had once taken from her. A chance, they said, in his final days. He carried a folded, yellowed piece of paper in his vest pocket, 7 names, and a note scrawled on the back in his own trembling hand. "Forgiveness isn't earned, it's offered."